My name is Marissa Johnson, and I graduated from SPU, I almost said 2009, that's such a lie, in 2013, and I have a degree in Christian scriptures and philosophy. And what I'm doing these days is I'm a full-time nanny of 2-year-old twin boys. And when I'm not doing that, I'm politically involved.
What are you doing?
I'm politically involved, particularly with the national presidential campaign right now, with Black Lives Matter. So yeah.
Peace. I'm Nikkita. I graduated from SPU in 2008. I studied sociology. Currently, I have 5 jobs. You know how we do.
She's not even kidding.
I'm an artist and an attorney. I do a lot of things. So.
My name is Chanel. I graduated in 2012 with a degree in communication. During my senior year, I started working at a child care center on site at the Education Research Center at South Lake Union, where I am currently still a teacher for with toddlers 2 to 3-year-olds.
Okay. So I wanted to know if SPU or your experiences here had anything to do with kind of what led you to do what you're doing now. I know you're a teacher, so maybe that was always the plan, but is there anything that you're involved with now that maybe things that was on campus or things that transpired while you were here that you were involved with kind of influence your decision to go forward?
My plan was always to become a teacher. It was always something I knew I wanted to do from a very young age. I had rows of teddy bears like lined up, and I would be teaching them God knows what. And I remember my favorite. One of my favorite gifts was when I was like 10 years old. I got a whiteboard for Christmas, and it was like the best thing ever. So that's something I always knew I wanted to do. SPU was the best choice for me at the time. It still is. I come and I look at my experience, and I wouldn't be where I am at today without the experience I had here at SPU. It was growing up in a very multicultural public school setting. It was very different being at SPU within a very white setting, and it was great. I love that because I had a chance to chat and talk and have very interesting conversations with people and with professors. Probably one of my favorite experiences. I probably have 2 pretty good experiences. One was when I was taking a English class, and the poem was Theme for English B by Langston Hughes. And of course, I happened to be the only Black man in the room. So weird, right? And so my professor, she said, I'm going to apologize. I want you to read this poem. And it was something that was, it actually, I think, I look back on that and I say, like, that was a very powerful moment for me, because it wasn't that, it wasn't ignorance. It was the fact that she really wanted me to use that voice to really bring life into people. And I know that there are some people who get angry about hearing that story. I did not take it that way. I took it as an opportunity and a privilege to read that poem aloud to my white classmates. The other experience I had, my other experience was, at the time there was only one faculty member who happened to be of color on the for history. And so he taught UCOR 2000. And it was super fun. And I remember one of the things that he said to me at the end of the class is, because one of the assignments was that we had to explore our ancestry in some way. We had to go back in time, and I actually took that very seriously, and I actually paid for the ancestry.com, and I went to do some research. And I only got so far back. I got back to the 1860s, which is about right for being a black man. But he said, when I gave this assignment, I wasn't sure how far you and the other person of color, there was a black girl in the class, how far you would get. But I was really impressed with that work. And then he also said to me, he said, in all my years here at SPU, he's no longer here, but in all my years here at SPU, you're the only two black students I've taught in a U-Core class. So it was very interesting, but it was a really great experience. So those are some of my favorite things that I've happened here.
Yeah, well, I mean, so the nannying part, for the nannying that I do, that certainly came from SPU because I have lots of student loans to pay off, and nannying gave me well to do that. In terms of what I do, the work that I do in political agitation, I'm tempted to say that I really wanted a banner, which I still do, and I'm still lobbying for that from this place. But it's not happening yet. But I mean, we could talk about all the microaggressions that you experience at SPU, right? But I think we kind of already know what those are. So to give context, how I came into SPU was my senior year of high school was probably one of the hardest years of my life, other than this one. My parents had both lost their jobs in what's now known as the Great Recession. And for the first half of my senior year of high school, I was the only person in my family who had a job. And so originally my dream school to go to was Clark Atlanta, which is historically, I was like, I'm going to be on the STEP team. Like, I just had all these dreams because I went to a very white high school, moving from Louisiana, so I've been isolated from my people. So I was like, listen, I'm going to go to black college, I'm going to get free. And then the recession happened, and I was just like, I can't leave my family. They financially depend on me. And I kind of didn't know where I was going to go. So then I was like, okay, I'll just go to Western for a year until I can figure my life out and then maybe make it to Atlanta and meet Ludacris. And I just had all these dreams. Still on the bucket list. So I sort of discovered SPU about a month and a half before I started here. And my transition to deciding to come to the university was very, very swift. Like probably a week before I got here, moved into the dorms, I was $10,000 short for school. And when I got to SP campus, I literally did not have a dime to my name, didn't have a job, had never seen campus before, but just was on some God told me to be here stuff. Which is crazy, but yeah. So when I came in, and especially because I'm a lifelong Christian, but I didn't grow up in the church, I really, really, this was the first time that I was around other Christians my age, and I was so excited to be in Christian community, and I was so excited to be at a university and at a place where I could learn, but I could also talk about my faith because that was so foreign to me. And they really got me with that engage in culture, change the world, because I had never heard of a Christianity that was about helping other people. The Christianity I knew that was mostly about trying to keep your legs closed until you get married and hating gay people. And also pro-Israel. So when I got to SPU, I had high hopes, and I think for me, what's relevant to this conversation is that I thought that because I was coming into a Christian environment, that my racial experience would be different. And so when I got to campus, I wasn't a part of Early Connections because I literally got assigned a dorm 2 days before. I wasn't a part of Early Connections, so I came in with everybody else. And I'd already been hanging out with all the women on my floor. Of course, they're all white women. And I was, doing the rah-rah-rah thing, hey, I'm at SPU, we got our cool lanyards, went to the soccer game, which is the only one I ever went to. Yeah, the one other black guy I saw in that area, who I'm not gonna name because probably you guys know him, hit on me the first night. I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna do my thing. And I remember the students who were a part of all the MEP stuff on campus coming up to me during that time and be like, hey, you want to kick it with us, what's good? And for me, I read that moment as either I go hang out with MEP students or I participate on my floor. And I, being raised in this great colorblind utopia, was thinking that I was achieving something great by being no, I can fit in the white group, because that was sort of my internalized oppression that I had been raised with. And then, so that's the context that I came into SPU, was not expecting to go to a really white school. And of course I experienced all the same microaggressions that a lot of people in this room probably have. When people have prayer requests that turn into dogging on my minority scholarships and tell me that I just got there because I'm black, even though I'm like, my GPA is rocking yours, so don't. But I also think what's relevant is that, so a lot of my time at SPU was just about surviving. And for me, it was like, it felt like this duality, right? Of like, the cost of being in Christian community was to forgo my own sort of racial safety. And a lot of times how that was taught to me here on SPU campus was that I was a bridge for people to walk on and to learn upon, and that I should take all the bullets that people threw at me with grace and ease and be this pristine black woman who is not angry but who educates the white masses. That all really came to a head for me my junior year here at SPU, particularly around the murder of Trayvon Martin. That's when voter suppression really started kicking up in the United States. And I was also at the time living in a house full of Christian white women from SPU. They're all wonderful people, go to their weddings and all that good jazz, but it was a horrible living experience. I experienced a lot of racism and microaggressions in my house. And so I was just kind of at this point where I was just like, F everything, I'm gonna leave SPU. Nobody really knows that. I'm gonna leave SPU, I'm kind of done. But I had to take this class for my philosophy major, that counted for my philosophy major and my Christian scriptures class. And I was taking it with this professor who I wasn't really crazy about because I'd met him a couple times, but I was just like, this is a requirement of mine. I didn't think I was gonna like him. I was like, I'm just gonna like move through this class. His name is Brian Bantam, which is like really funny now. And I took this class called BART, which is like, sounds like the most boring class ever. But I took this class with him, and all things aside, he ended up being a really, really influential person for me, like saving me that year and teaching me possibilities that year. But his influence in my life has not only been consistent, but it's also made me reimagine sort of the possibilities for myself so far that what I'm doing right now I could have never imagined. And why I think that's relevant to this conversation here is that I know that students on campus have had a lot of conversation about the importance of faculty of color. And when I came into SPU, I would have said, I don't need a black professor, right? Like, I don't need a black professor. I don't need black friends. I don't need to be that black person. I'm not that person who talks about race. But the reality is that race is so entrenched into our world, white supremacy is ingrained within our religion, that I did need that. And I did need a place to start decolonizing my Christianity and to reimagine a faith that wasn't shaped by a white Jesus. So for me, I mean, I learned a lot of things at SPU campus, but one of the things that helped me survive, because another conversation on SPU campus has been the retention rate of students of color here. One of the things that helped me survive was truly Dr. Bantam and his influence in my life, which I know is true for a lot of students on this campus. And so I think that professors of color hold extreme influence of just even helping get students through college, but not only that, helping shape the people that they're going to be moving forward.
When I got to SPU in 2004, there were less than 5% students of color. In my time at SPU, I never had a black or brown professor, but I was fortunate to have quite a few women professors. My first year at SPU, I actually tried to leave. I kept $500 in my bank account at all times so I could buy a plane ticket home. And it wasn't just for me the experience of racism. I was 2,000 miles away from Indianapolis, Indiana. I was not so sure about this whole Christianity thing, though my entire life I had been pumped up to think I was going to be a pastor. I had a lot of questions that had just been unanswered for literally my entire time in the church. So coming to a school where there was this idea that we are all Christian, we all follow these same rules around being Christian, and we all think the same around Christianity, was actually very challenging and a lot of a culture shock. And even today, like, to be honest, I would not call myself a Christian at the point where I am in my own spiritual walk in life. So it was that experience plus a guy named Joe Snell. I'm gonna try really hard not to cry, because Joe died a few years ago. And I used to go sit in his office probably like every week, at least 3 times a week, and be like, yo, Joe, I cannot win these people here. And I would close the door, and like, I would always have something to rant about. And I'm very much I'm a fighter, and if I feel like something's unjust, I just have to go for it. So it was those conversations with Joe that I think really started to shape for me an understanding of what compassion is. I did not enjoy my time at SPU. I tried to leave multiple times. There was conversations like the ones I had with Joe that reminded me why I was here and helped me think about what the point of an educational environment is. So while I would say my experience at SPU had a lot of racism and a lot of sexism and a lot of homophobia, at the same time it was a place where I really learned, I refined my analysis about why I oppose those things, why I oppose white supremacy, why I oppose capitalism, why I am an abolitionist. And I wouldn't necessarily say that people should be in adversity to develop that kind of analysis, but I do think for me there was something like clandestine about it. And I have to give SPU some credit, like this is where I radicalized, where I really was able to make some big decisions about the sorts of principles and things I was willing to be about, and it was because of not just classes, but really relationships with key staff. So not just Joe, Tyler Harrison, and Kenesha, Lynn Van Antwerp. There were a lot of people, and even students older than me, who really held me down during what I would consider like a culture shock period in my life. And so when I finished at SPU, I was still trying to be that pastor. I was trying really hard. I was like, I'm gonna do it, guys. Gonna commit. Gonna go to seminary. You know, I'm gonna be a Free Methodist pastor. And I worked for an organization here in the city and was very committed to ministry and working with young people for a very long time. And SPU was a part of that path. And in that, what I discovered was, I feel like I really started to learn about the constraints of religion and what it means to use religion as a barrier and not as a way of building a deep spiritual understanding of who God is and who humanity is, which eventually meant I left the organization I was working for. But I think my time at SPU was really powerful in taking a very angry young brown woman and essentially putting me in a space where I could safely practice these political things that I do now. Like, I was an agitator on campus. I one time went around and I put up signs that said affirmative action for white people for 200 years or something like that. And like, I would watch students like rip them off the doors, like people were really mad and they'd ball it up and I'd like, I wasted so much time. But it was a good place for me to practice what it means to be disruptive and challenge the status quo. So as much as like I kind of was like very angry during my time here, I think it was a good sparring ground and set me up for the things that I'm involved in now, and really gave me space to not only refine part of my analysis, but to also practice, direct actions, being a demonstrator and a protester, which is a big part of my life now.
Coming to here was definitely a lot of a culture shock. I grew up in LA all my life. I went to a high school that was very, very diverse. In my classes, being in AP honors classes, the level of diversity slimmed down just a little bit, but I could still walk into every classroom and see another person of color. I could walk throughout the hallway, see another person of color, and the numbers, the came up for urban preview, and I just remember everybody being so nice, just overwhelmingly nice, and it just threw me off because in LA it just wasn't so nice like here on top. And I mean, people would be walking around like, hey, you want to come into the dorm? They're talking to us about campus life. And I was like, you know, just allow me to be away from home, but still close enough to go back to home every now and then, and it was just giving me a lot of difference. And so I came up here, and overall I would say, I've asked myself this question a number of times, if I was doing college over again, would I choose SPU? And I'm pretty sure my answer would be no. When I got to campus my freshman year, I started working in the admissions office under Annalise, helping to recruit students of color to campus. So a lot of the role I played here was helping out with urban preview, making phone calls to prospective students, talking to them about about SPU and trying to get them to come here. And in the beginning of that time, I was so excited to do that. Like, I'm a part of helping get more and more people here. And seniors and upperclassmen around me were always like, y'all don't understand. When I was here when I was a freshman, it was like 10 of us here, if that. And now, you guys are in here, and there's just so many more of us around. Like, we should be doing so much on campus. I was excited to be a part of that. But by my senior year, I really felt myself questioning my role in admissions, trying to recruit other students of color to come here, because I didn't believe so much in what I was saying anymore to get them here. And I started to feel that probably somewhere around my junior year, and mainly because it was something about campus that didn't really fit with the statement of engaging culture and change the world. I didn't feel like I was being engaged, or like I was being really brought in to get to know who I was, where I come from, and like who I am and how I'm different and celebrated, and is the same as everyone else at the same time. And that alone led me to feel like, I knew a lot of people on campus, and I was doing a lot of things on campus, but I still felt ostracized. And so how that relates to what I'm doing now, I believe that, we all know that race is something, or being against someone else simply because they're different in how they look, and what they practice, and they believe is something that's learned. It's not something that we just come out of the importance of what we're doing. And so I work with younger children, and at first I just started off as, I'm just really good with it. I feel like childish, with young kids. But then I started to realize, I'm at a center, I'm at a place where it's predominantly white, and very much so upper class, and since I'm dealing with a lot of parents and families who are doctors, researchers, scientists, and these children are very privileged in different aspects of that. And in my time that I've been there, now 5 years, I've come across probably on both hands the number of children of color that I've come across, whether they be black and white, Asian, very few Hispanics, and that's just given that we're in Seattle. But I thought it was cool to be a teacher and in a position of them seeing someone else that looked like them. I'm now in a class where I have one little boy who is brown like myself, and no one else in our class is that way. And then I had a really in-depth conversation the other day. I'm talking about a 3-year-old, him noticing that he looked different from everyone else in the classroom, and me being in a position to make him feel empowered and beautiful just the way he is, and learning that people are different, that we are different, and that's a beautiful thing. And I took my experience here to go ahead and want to go out and work with younger children in the mission I'm working towards becoming a national teacher in high school. To be a person that they see in leadership that looks like them and that is doing something with their lives, letting them know, hey, you can do what it is that you set out that you want to do, and giving them a place where they feel included, and a place where they can come and talk to someone no matter what. So my experience here was interesting, to say the least, but I'm taking that experience now to try to do something different with younger children, starting up from a very young age.
So now if you guys have any questions, I think that we can start asking questions now.
I have a question. I know some of you in the panel, and those of you I don't know personally, I just want to say that I'm really proud of each one of you. It means a lot to have you back here. Now as a staff here at SPU, I think that I always reflect on things that I wish I had known back when I was a freshman or as a sophomore, or things that my voice I would have let out more often. So I think my question is, now that you're at the place where you are, reflecting back 4 years, 8 years ago, 10 years, to some of those who are here, students or staff, what are some of the things or advice you will give to those of us who are still here that you wish you could go back and tell yourselves, do this, say this, don't be afraid to ask these questions?
That was a while ago for me, 12 years. There's two things I would say to myself. The first would be get off campus sooner.
Yes.
My freshman year, my freshman year, well, I still club because our lifestyle expectations were different when I got here. But I would have told my freshman self get off campus sooner. My first year here, I lived in Emerson, and I lived on the Bridges floor. So I actually had a lot of black and brown friends, because we basically lived on the same floor. But I never left campus, and so it wasn't until I finished my, outside of my job, I had a job in the South End that I worked full-time at from end of sophomore year through senior year. Outside of that, I didn't really leave campus to go see everything that was in Seattle. So I think I would really tell people, like, get away from here, like really do bust the bubble, not because it's like a really nice cliche thing to say, but because there's a lot of like other really great stuff in this city to be invested in that I think would have given me a lot of life had I found it sooner. Like I had periods of time when I was here when I think I was just like really depressed because I was lonely and I just didn't know who to be around. So I wish I would have discovered the things that I know now sooner. I think I also would have told myself, man, this is actually a hard one. I go back and forth on this. I fought really hard while I was at SPU to see SPU change. Sat in a lot of offices, wrote a lot of documents, held a lot of meetings, was at a lot of events, said a lot of things, like a lot. Sometimes I feel like I wish I would have just learn how to let some things roll off my back, not the important things. Like there's a lot of things that something needs to be said to, but there were just other times that I let stuff get under my skin that when I thought about it after I left the classroom, no one else in that classroom was thinking about it after I left. I was the only one who went back to my dorm room. And I wish somebody would have told me, it's great to speak up in class. I'm very proud of how you hold it down, but at the same time, remember, like they're not taking the same baggage out of this room that you are. And there was nobody to tell me that and to help me identify like the real angst that I was carrying with me. It was very painful. I was very hurt when I left SPU. And I think that was hurt that I didn't have to take with me had I had someone to help walk me through it. So I guess what I would say is those of you who have been here for a while, if you see a freshman or a sophomore who just really needs some love, like do that. It's really important because I think that damaged me in a way for like my first couple of years out of SPU. I actually had to do a whole lot of healing work because I lived very defensively in every aspect of my life after that because I was so used to being the only one. So I would go back and tell myself, say what you need to say, but remember, like these folks' burden, like their ignorance is not my burden. I'm gonna have to take that home.
First, I just want to say I was very jealous of the Bridges floor when I first got here. They saved money, and I was upset about that.
We still keep on.
Yeah, that's cool. What I'm just saying.
What's the Bridges floor?
The Bridges floor lasted from about 2003 to 2007 or 8.
No, it was
And
here when I got here.
Well, it didn't last. You all didn't get it in the same construct that we did. So by the time y'all had it in after I had left, it was all of Emerson was a part of Bridges. When I got here, Bridges was literally just 2 floors, a men's floor and a women's floor, where we put all the brown people and a couple of white people, usually missionary kids, who were have a little bit of a culture shock being back in the United States. And we basically would go back to our floor and talk hella shit. So it was also the place where I learned a lot of other behaviors that I probably would not have learned elsewhere, just because, these were the homies. So Bridges was great. We had a lot of really good cultural conversations. It was a place that I felt comfortable saying the things that maybe I wouldn't have said in class, like, dang, these white people here. And there were lovely other white folks who'd be like, yeah, man, I feel you. Right, we didn't bridge any, we bridged ourselves on Bridges. I think later they tried to expand the concept, but at the same time, I think for my freshman year, it was good, because I probably would have hopped a plane back to Indiana. I was like, I cannot with Seattle, but I'm here 12 years later. But yeah, that's Bridges.
I think where SPU though was in terms of engaged culture and world culture for me means a lot more than just race. Just any way that someone differs from your mindset, your thinking, how you were brought up, what you look like. And in that sense, it didn't always feel like a safe space where someone could be different. And so I think I lived this out for myself personally. It did take me a couple of years, but I would tell myself going back in to start, and just anyone who's here right now, to be unapologetically yourself in every shape, form, or fashion that you are. Be you, and make sure that who you are is felt and is seen, so that we can continue to see those differences. Because if you hide yourself in a shell and nobody really gets to experience who you are, then we're never going to really engage culture to change anything. So that would be one thing that I would say. And the other thing would be to not give up hope. A part of what helped me to get through SPU was, for some people it was a teacher. For me, it was faculty on campus that I got really close to. Ina Lee, who was my boss at the time, and Jason Chivers were both. They're still in admission, but I think in a different capacity than when I was here. Moving on up the ladder. But English is just a very inspirational person to be around, and she's very hopeful about everything in life and everything that she listens to. She can see the light at the end of the tunnel, or she's trying to see the brightness in it. And being around people like that, when you feel like there's just no hope for what's going on campus, or you just don't see change happening quick enough. Having people like that around you in your circle is very important to help you get through things. And for people that are on campus right now, you may not see things coming to fruition, but you can see just from this panel that things progress each year and each year. I might not have felt it while I was here, but it's coming, down the road. It may not be here while you guys are here, but hopefully, prayerfully, down the road, it's coming along. And the other thing I would say is stick together. Towards the end of my year, I saw a lot of division happening amongst different groups from Mosaic to BSU, and there was things happening that would pull us apart, and that shouldn't be, how we're going to make any type of change. They can't look at us and see us pulling together to get the things done that we want done. Then why would they, fight for us in the first place anyway?
So when I graduated at SPU, my nickname was Rabbi Dr. Reverend Marissa, and I've been told that I preach a lot. So tonight I'm sure will be no exception. I think what Nikkita said about finding community off campus is key. My community off campus ended up being a church, but it was a super white church that I had to drop like a bad boyfriend. But I think one of the things that school and jobs and capitalism and this world that we're in gets you into cycles of chasing the thing that will make your life stable. And I know me particularly, growing up in a family, we grew up in poverty, and if you're a brown kid who grew up in poverty, you were told you go to college because college is a great equalizer. It is how you can not be poor all the time, and you can have the same opportunities as everybody else. That's clearly bull. That's not, stratification happens within college as well. But I realized for myself that I was always sort of chasing a certain level of stability, and I think us in groups and us in community, we're always looking for the next thing, but always within this nice, small, cute little box, right? So when you're in school, you're trying to just get your grades and get your classes in and finish your degree, and then when you get out, you're trying to get a job, and then you're trying to get a house, and then you're trying to get married, and then you're trying to have a kid, and then there's all these not that those are easy things, but there's all these sort of predetermined life markers, right, for us that we're trying to achieve. And for myself personally, it was all about like getting to a certain level of stability. And I think that happens when you're a student, and I think that also happens when you're even in a job. I think what I learned, what I'm thankful for that God taught me that I learned coming out of SPU and in the work that I do now, is that Christianity, to be a follower of Christ, if we're serious about it, it's not a game. Like, it's not this cute game of life where you hit all your markers and you find all the stability. In fact, the Bible doesn't even tell us that stability is part of the package that we get when it comes, right? And the reality is in this world that is incredibly corrupt and run by money and run by oppression, in order to live like Christ, it's gonna cost you something. Now, that was not something that I learned at SPU, if I'm going to be honest. The Christianity that I found here at SPU, it was nice and it was comfortable and it wore cute boots and it went to worship services and it raised its hands, but it was not really trying to go to jail for another person. It was not really trying to visit people in prison. It was not really trying to look at somebody and say, you know what, I jacked up. It was not out there hanging out with the gang member. It was not going and hanging out with the Jewish anarchists. It was not doing any of those things. And so I think in a lot of ways, when I got to SPU, though I was happy to be in Christian community, it really hindered my faith a lot, because it taught me this safe, comfortable Christianity. That you can accept Christ, but within these nice confines of like finishing your degree and like having a job and everything. And so I told you guys a little bit about how when I came to SPU, it was under really extreme financial circumstances. I'm telling you, when I got here, I was so lit that the women on my floor were probably really scared of me, because we would like be having conversations. I'd be like, Christ told me to leave SPU tomorrow. I'd be gone. I'd pack my bag and I'd be gone. And they were like, what? And I was real, and I meant it. By junior year, that was not the case, right? Because I had become comfortable, because I was already invested in certain systems. And so I think the greatest thing that I've learned leaving SPU has been that you can't both pursue stability and comfort and safety and worldly acceptance and pursue Christ. You can't. And that if you are actually going to pursue the things of Christ, which mean overcoming oppressive systems, right? You really have to die to self. You have to be willing to give something up. I don't know that we're raised in a Christianity, really, where people are willing to give something up, something substantial, including their reputation or how other people will view them. I hope that God brings you guys, or has already brought you, all to that conclusion of the things that you will have to give up to die to follow Christ. That for me was a really, really hard transition. And so I just want to encourage you guys to like look beyond, like you're always going to have new stresses, you're always going to have bills, you're always going to have another thing to like be fighting beyond. But when you push all that to the side, though it's important, at the end of the day, who are you? Like, what are you about? And what are you willing to die for? And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And those were not questions that I was asking in my Christianity here at SPU. But I think that they're questions that are necessary for us to live out Christianity beyond SPU. That's it.
Let me call it out.
Yeah. He's heard it all before.
I have. I've heard it all before. It's fun sitting next to Marissa sometimes. That's the end of that sentence. That's the end of that sentence. You know, it's one of the hardest things I think sometimes coming to a group like this. It's hard holding a difference. And I'm very different than I think people on this panel. I think that I'm very different than maybe some of you coming in this room. As a gay black man at this institution, I came out when I was 20 years old. While I was here, I remember being in tears and like calling up my PA at the time. It's not how hard it is, but my PA at the time, and trying to figure out what it all meant and what did that mean for me and what did it mean for my story. But I didn't stop being involved. And I think that sometimes what happens, one of the reasons that professors probably still remember me, and I still can walk on this campus, and I can still hang out with professors, is not only because I was one of the only black men in their room, but because I was willing to speak up and ask questions, because I was willing to have hard conversations in class. And oftentimes I had professors come up to me and they would say, I'm glad that you said that. I'm glad you thought about it. I'm glad you spoke up. Because what happens oftentimes is it's hard holding a difference. That's different. It's hard. It's easy to sit back and say, oh, okay, that's what the class feels, so that's okay. I lived in Sixth Hill my first year. That was wild. And then I moved down to Third Hill, and I was elected Hill Senator. And that's how I found my power. That's how I found my voice. And my question always is, how often are you willing to engage in the powers that be to fight for that change and to get that change happening? Because it's really easy to sit on the sidelines and say, I wish that so-and-so, I wish they did blank. I wish that this is what happened. It's really nice sitting in this room. That's super awesome. I love it. But what I tell my students all the time is that you have to engage. You have to be an upstander. You have to be part of that. So I did Hill Hall Senate. I was a senator for 1 year, and then I was a School of Education senator for the next year, and I did my student teaching. But you have to be willing to hold that difference, and you have to be willing to speak up. And I think that sometimes what I see oftentimes, especially with our students of color, even in my classroom, which is predominantly, it's hard. It's like United Nations in my classroom. And they're like, and sometimes I walk into them and sometimes I have friends that come in and they're like, how do you know how to pronounce all those names? And I'm like, it just happens. It just comes to me. But sometimes it's easy. The easy road is simply to, say, well, I'm the only one that feels that way, and so I'm not going to speak up. And so I guess, my encouragement is become a part of it. Become a part of the structures that are here at SPU that want student voice and campaign and run on those things and do that work. Because, who else is going to do it? It's hard. It's hard hearing, sometimes, because Marissa pokes fun at me because I'm like, I'm the token black conservative on this panel. But it is. I loved my time at SPU. I really did. It was world shifting. It was. I remember the Falcon did a story about a guy who came out. And it became a huge debacle. It was wild. It was a cover story. And then the Quality Ride came that very same year, and it was and they were challenging lifestyle expectations and the way the faculty, and then the faculty wrote something in the Falcon. So it was a wild year, but it was a really fun experience. I would not be where I am today in my faith, and my faith has very much changed, and my faith has very much shifted. And I think part of that is, being a black male who happens to be gay. Those are dualities. Those are things that are often separate. Within the gay community, it's not fun being black, and within the black community, it's not fun being gay. And neither of them are, talking to one another. Neither of them want to say, neither of them want to call the other group out. And so you deal with that, and then you add Christian on top of that. And now, so you have, Christians don't want to talk about being gay, and Christians don't want to talk about being black. And, Christians don't want to talk about, oh, well, you're black and gay, so I don't know where to put you. And so you have all of these, the term that's used is intersectionality, and you're trying to figure out how to, I got that term from you. So
Yes.
some things rub off. Some things are wrong. So anyway, there's a lot there. I think you have to continue the conversation. I think you can't simply stop talking. I think you can't simply just sit in your class anymore and say, oh well, that's what happened today. Christian scriptures. I was really nice. We read a lot of the Bible and we talked a lot about stuff. It's there's more than that. So I guess that's it. Anyone?
I don't know how to ask this question, so I'll try to preface it a little bit. But I really want to see this a little bit. I spent a lot of my youth in Brooklyn, Brownsville, Brooklyn, Brooklyn, you probably know Brownsville, in the public housing projects. And most people there, it was predominantly Black Americans and people who looked like me. And so the ethos that governed our neighborhood was a movement called Black Nationalism, think about this. And so that's where I spent my youth. Then I come to Seattle a few years, I spent a few projects as well, and a few years later I came to SPU. A lot of the things that you guys said tonight really resonated with me, and everything you said resonated with me. I tried to leave here, but that every single year I've been here, couldn't get in. And I was seeking asylum within my personal statement. I wrote that because this place is awful for me. And I've been called everything from spick to Sandager to when I said this at the event recently. And worse things than that too. And so it's been unpleasant for me. I tried to get out of here and when I saw that I couldn't, I tried to rouse the rabble and start movements and storm over it. And it's part of the way. And then, so my community, like you guys, was outside here. Because here I saw nothing. I couldn't study here, nothing at this place. Even until this very day, like I just gave you a minimum student. But paid $15 for parking. So there came a point where I saw that I couldn't leave here, I was trapped here, so I tried to start movements here. Nothing happened for me, so I went to as much as I could off campus. And this summer came along, and I didn't know this sister right here, sitting right next to you. And I never met you either, Sister Nikkita, but I had seen you. Gay marches, performances, this and that. So when Sister Marissa went on stage before Bernie Sanders, as the whole world knows, I was standing about 10 to 20 feet away. And so, and my brother and I were there. My brother's Black American, and we were the only two people of color in the crowd, in the audience. And before she went on, it was all about peace and love, and I wore cold face or whatever it's called, and liberal, progressive, and this and that. And it was cool being in the audience. The first thing we went through the first people to get there. But I looked at James and I was like, well, there's nobody here who looks like us, and so you know what we think. So the time passed, the sister goes on, and that entire crowd, that entire audience, who was so peace and love, was engulfed in this unanimity, this feeling of this oneness of mind that was channeled. It was similar to being like in a lynch, like surrounded by a lynch mob. And everybody was directing hate, vicious, vehement, vociferous, and very violent hate towards the sister. And I'm sitting there around this, and so, sorry, I'm gonna move a little bit. But I'm thinking of something. So I come from Brooklyn, and so Bernie Sanders, following him, his political moves my whole life. And I thought about him politically, so that's kind of what I'm reading about. So I thought about him politically. But then at that moment, when I saw how he behaved, how he reacted, how the people around us reacted, I was like, this is not my guy. This is not my guy. And then I thought about who else is there. So what I'm saying is, I know I was disappointed. I felt something akin to hatred towards him and towards everybody there because I felt unsafe. And And so it's like, who now people politically, who are we supposed to vote for? Because I also know, I've studied punctiliously, meticulously, Hillary Clinton. I'm not a smart guy, but I read about things. So I followed her meticulously. No one more than her and her husband have decimated our communities, our people. When we started from welfare reform and so on and so forth, you guys know. Than her and her husband. And so now she's talking about women. Now she's talking about Black Lives Matter, people of color. Who are we to vote for?
Great question.
Can I jump in here really quickly? 'Cause
Marissa, you're gonna say nobody. Okay. Done. Check. Can we move on?
I want to respond. Yeah, I'm sorry. I got a little emotional when you talked about that because even like when I watched the video, it was something very evil in the air, and so I still have a lot of PTSD from that. But one thing that came out of what you were talking about when you explained UW, and I'll talk about the voting thing as well, that I want to clarify that I don't think that I knew as a student is no college university is safe for Black or brown students. It's not made for you. It's made off your backs, for sure, and it'll take your money, for sure, and it'll give you that white settler education, for sure. But it's not made for you. This country was not made for you. And so I think having that understanding is really important because as much as SPU was I had a good time, I turned up. But as much as I had struggles, at SPU campus, the idea was, well, I should go to this different school and it'll be better. Or I'll go to this different school and it'll be better. Or I'll go to this. And the reality is, and I had this is why I'm not at seminary right now, is that our entire systems, all academia is affected by white supremacy. And it was never created for us. Like there's never a space created for us. And so that's one of the things that you have to know that I didn't know, like when you go into schooling and education, is understanding that you're not getting this objective, like race neutral, class neutral, gender neutral education. You are getting white supremacist, capitalistic, patriarchal, settler education. And that's a thing that we need for certain things in this world, but that's what you're coming into. And I think that that'll help ease to some of the going into class and being frustrated every single day because there are things you can change, but if you're a circle and you're trying to fit in a square, all you can do is just try to be comfortable in that square. You can never make yourself, something else that you can't. But to your question, politically, if we vote for it, I'm sure we'll all have different views. My views are very clear of political system wasn't created for us, so I don't know that voting is the best engagement. I don't know that there are any candidates for us. I don't know that U.S. democracy has ever been a thing that has worked for people of color. But one of the things that I talk about frequently that I think might be of interest to you and people in this room that I'm talking about in a lot more public spaces moving forward is screw this presidential election. It's all political theater and it's going to be over in November and one football team's going to be happy and one football team's going to be mad. And then a year later, everybody will be like, this person sucks, our lives still suck, and then we'll do it all over again 3 years after. It's the same thing, right? So screw all that, put that aside. What are different oppressed communities within the United States doing to collectively work together to resist, right? And to push for revolution. So whether that be along racial lines, whether that be folks who are killing it with Not One More, whether it be Black Lives Matter people, I've even made an argument that Tea Partiers should engage with BLM and with undocumented folks. And so I always encourage people if you're going to focus your efforts, you can voting and elections are not the only place to put your energy to actually make really systemic change. I don't vote, and I've made a lot of change within politics. And so I'm really interested in students and people of color pursuing avenues of building solidarity amongst different oppressed groups. And I think that that's important and really clutch here too for here on SPU campus. It's you live in a world and you live in a system that will intentionally keep you isolated and separated from one another. Even the administration on this campus does not want the students of color to get together and really decide for themselves what they want. Because then you have power, and then you have community. And so the more that you can build those relationships on campus, the more that you can build those relationships between students and staff on campus and outside of campus, it's going to give you power for whatever resistance models that you want to push forward.
I say vote if you want to vote. You're going to vote for the lesser of however many evils, yet still evil. I mean, that's the reality. We're going to end up with evil. But you can vote. I think, though, I really believe in people power. I believe in the power of divestment and then reinvesting where you actually believe you can build something. There's one thing about dismantling is one thing. Resisting is another thing. I, however, think successfully building for ourselves is both dismantling and resisting at the same time. And something I think we frequently overlook is the power of divestment and reinvesting in those places that we are interested in seeing become strong and fortified. So those are two things I would say in regards to like our political structure. If I think about that in the microcosm of SPU, I think a lot of students are afraid. And we are afraid because for a lot of us, this is the first time we've ever had the opportunity to go to college for some of us in our families. And so this is that thing we've been told, here's your American dream, here's your piece of the pie, go eat, work your ass off, come out with hella debt and be a slave in a different format. And I wish I had not been so afraid of losing this opportunity here that I had turned up even harder than I did at SPU. And I say this to a lot of the students who are upset about what this context looks like. Another college will take you. They will. There is someplace else to go to school. You do not have to be at SPU, but if you're going to leave SPU, divest. Don't leave quietly, don't leave under the radar, don't don't just like apply and disappear. Like if they're not hearing you when you say this space is white supremacist, this space is patriarchal, this space is not really about being like Christ, then let them know, like, what do capitalists know? Capitalists know money. That's how you make things work in this system. So let them know, I'll drop out, I'll leave, I'll take my money, I'll take other students with me, I'll go someplace else. I think too often when you're in an oppressive situation, your oppressor wants you to think that you're powerless, that you have nothing to offer. You are actually dependent upon this continued relationship with this abusive person in order to continue to function in the system. It's not true. We actually have a lot of power. By simply getting up and disrupting a speech, you can actually send waves all across the globe. It takes tenacity. It takes getting over your fear and being courageous. It takes being willing to take the consequence and the sacrifice. You will lose things. I know that in the work that I do, if as an agitator, my legal license, my law license, could at some point come under scrutiny. I'm not interested in keeping a license to practice law in this government if it means that I have to forego what I know to be right and principled. I think it's the same thing about our education. And I did this at the law school at one point, was like, yo, if y'all don't start making some structural changes, I will leave. And please understand, I will not pay back my scholarship because this is not what I signed up for. So I think we have to have the audacity to say that, and then the audacity to follow through if you need to. I know that some of y'all are scared. You want to leave your mark on SPU in a nice, pretty way. You want to be like, oh, we made the BSU lifted up and high and powerful, and I don't want people to remember me as the angry black person. Be remembered as the angry black person and have some stuff change around here, or leave, and it's the exact same situation the next time another black or brown child steps on this campus, the next time another queer person steps on this campus. Because I remember the equality ride that came. I also remember lots of SPU students having some pretty horrible things to say about queer folks and not having come out yet. That was incredibly damaging. So I guess, to recap, because that's what we lawyers do, I would encourage you, if you want to vote, vote. Remember, it's still going to be evil. know that you have power, and divest and reinvest. I think that is the best thing we can do for ourselves. It's not going to be easy. I think what Marissa was saying about the cost of discipleship, the cost of being actually Christ-like really is discomfort. And some of y'all, not all of you, some of y'all are a little too, maybe all of you, some folks are a little too comfortable.
Thank you.
She used to call me godmother SPU, which seems like I had so much SPU spirit. You know, doesn't that sound like, yeah, spirit?
Sounds like a lot of spirit.
Like that. I don't remember hat now though. Falcon awesome. That's what they said. It was like Falcon awesome, and it was like, yo, y'all know what that really sounds like? You're like chanting Falcon awesome in the gym. It was great. It was an interesting message.
So I noticed that we have like, okay, the conservative.
He says it's conservative, but
Oh my
he's not.
gosh.
But I mean like the working within the system and that appeal versus the revolutionary tear down, and I guess, how do you guys kind of work? You both have the same goal, but going about it a different way. How do you guys still maintain that relationship and not get in each other's way, and like not be used as a speed bump for one another
Oh my God.
Lots
by
of
the
tears.
system?
That's not tears. There's just like a lot of like, we're just not gonna talk about that. Let's not talk about that. And we do talk about a lot of stuff. Okay.
You should tell them how we met.
How we met, which was,
Can I tell?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think you were.
So we went to church
I think
together.
I'm gonna let them have their moment.
No, we went. The funny thing that is about what I think is funny about Evin and his like more conservative race is that I was working for Bethany Community Church as a children's director out in West Seattle, and one Sunday at church, this dude came up to me afterwards and was like, "Girl, I need to come meet you because I saw you up there make an announcement for the church and you were black." And I was like, "Yes, there's another black person. Hi, I'm Evin. Like, thank God you're here because we need more black people. I need a black person." And so it's kind of funny because he's all very like, "Oh, Ray, is that him?" Sorry, that was a digression. There was a question.
Let's see. Making it work. I want my students to still feel empowered, and that's the question. Is like, how do I still empower? How do I still make my students feel empowered? So if they want to follow Marissa and Nikkita's radicalization process, how can I ensure that they're still informed? You know, one of the things that students often do is they text like crazy, and I tell them like, so first of all, you have to know the rules before you can break the rules. And right now you don't know the rules. And so you're not going to use the letters before to write the word before. Okay? Right? And we don't speak in bingo, we speak in English. And so, I mean, but that's the language that I use with them, is the fact that like, you have to know the rules before you can break the rules. And it's very clear, and when I talk to Marissa, and I'm sure Nikkita, you're following along with this, is that Marissa and Nikkita are very informed. It's not like this is just coming out of nowhere. This is not something that's just like spur of the moment. Even after talking to Marissa, and I remember getting I remember watching TV one day. I remember watching TV, and I was like, "Is that Marissa? Is that?" That's Bernie Sanders. What is happening right now? Like, I immediately was texting people like, "Can you believe this shit?" Like, oh, passing around, and I was like spilling the tea, and I was like trying to figure out like what is she like? How did I not know? But once again,
You told me you were going to call Fox News on me.
oh, it's anytime Fox wants an exclusive, I'm in. Let me tell you the real story, Marissa. Bill O'Reilly can call me any day. So.
Like together.
There you go. No, and so I think that's the biggest thing that I've noticed about Marissa's work, and I think Nikkita's work as well, is the fact that it's very intentional. It's not accidental. And I want my students to be that same way as well. I want them to be also informed. I want them to make choices as well. And also knowing the consequences of those set choices as well. It's not like these things come without consequence. And I think that even Marissa will tell you that we've had some very, very real conversations about what happened after that. And how painful those things are that happen after that. And one of the things that I've learned also because Marissa and the work that she does, as well as the work I've seen through Nikkita, vicariously through like many channels, is they are both incredibly talented at the work that they do. And it's incredibly intentional, and it comes at great cost. And that's hard sometimes. And so one of my favorite lines that Marissa consistently says is like, she's learning who is ride or die for her. And these are hard things sometimes that happen. It's like, well, you pushed Bernie Sanders.
I didn't push.
Okay, but I'm standing by, you pushed him, whatever. Okay, we can go to the tape. Just put it up there. There you go. But things were lost in that process, but things were found. And I think that that's something that I want my students to have. I want my students to be able to take inventory and knowing who they are. And part of that means that you do need to know who actually is running for president. It's amazing, like teaching. Last year I taught 12th graders, and they had a very difficult time being able to name all the people who are running for president. And it's things like that which are very hard for this generation, particularly because they have they're swiping and they're scrolling. And I sound really old when I say that. I'm not. I'm only 29. I'm only 29. But they're swiping, they're scrolling, and they don't have that. They don't have that attention span to really engage. And so one of the things I really like about the work that Marissa and that Nikkita are doing is the fact that it's really bringing a lot of stuff back to the grassroots level, and it's really bringing a lot of stuff back to the hands of the people, which is really what we want to say what our government was supposed to be like. It was supposed to be this idea of that people would come together, they would pick somebody, they would represent the people. And it's gotten lost in the way. And so that's one of the things I have really appreciated this. Now, if you ask me to say any of that again, I will not. So don't expect to hear that anymore. That's the one time you're going to get that. But yeah, and I think that's for me in terms of, I do work for the system, and I do want students to stay in the system. I do want students to engage in the system. There's a certain power that does come from having a JD after your name. Even if, they call you names, they still are saying, so-and-so, JD. There's a power that's associated with it. There's a power that comes with being able to have a bachelor's degree. There's a power that comes with that. And I want my students to have access to that power.
I think it's knowing though, one, I think to answer your question about how do you keep relationships with folks who have different politics than you, I think it's respect for them as people having developed their own political process. I consider myself an anarchist, so I think that people have the right to develop their own thoughts about political notions, Now, when those thoughts start infringing upon other people's dignity and existence as human beings, I might have more to say about it, but I think it comes down to a respect of people, as critical thinking, creative people endowed by their creator to have thoughts, right? But I also think when we think about power, and I thought about this a lot since law school, is I hated law school, and I think I thought when I got there they were going to teach me how to undo the system. I was about to get my hammer, and I was going to have a crowbar, maybe a sledgehammer, we were going to do the damn thing. And what I learned how to do was use duct tape and some glue and how to paint back over old walls to keep the same old thing in place. And so I had to ask myself, the same way I did in SPU, what am I going to do differently or creatively with this thing that I have the opportunity to get, because there is power about having a JD behind my name. And for me, it means that I don't engage in the system, but I value those who can and will. Because there are people who have immediate needs right now. They need housing, they need food, they need clean water, they need an attorney to represent them when they get a charge that will make sure that they don't get more. Sometimes they get off. Like, there are immediate needs that have to happen, and those have to happen and play inside of this system. And there are people who are very good at that and can do it very graciously and still inform young people and inform folks in community while allowing them to develop their own thoughts, and that means they radicalize. That's not me. So I know that my role in this, though, is I can think creatively and strategically outside of the box, outside of the framework. I cannot tell you how many jobs the city, ACLU, Team Child have offered me since I finished law school, mainly because it looks really nice to have a black woman on your staff. And she can speak really well, too. It's a plus, you know. I know that I am better utilizing the power that I have to be creative. It comes at a cost. It means sometimes I don't get paid. Sometimes people don't like me. But I acknowledge that when folks like Evin and I and Marissa all play our role while at the same time respecting the difference in our tactics and the ways in which we use our power, we're actually more powerful, because we can put pressure on the system inside, outside, on top of it, build something entirely different that puts another type of pressure on the system. So I really think what's important is, instead of bashing each other for having different political views or choosing different ways by which we get our own liberation, as long as what Evan's doing doesn't infringe upon my ability to get my liberation, what I'm doing doesn't infringe upon his, and in fact is actually moving towards the same point, we are all good. Because we're doing it in the way that each of us is mentally and spiritually and physically purposed to do that. And so I think it's having value for that diversity of tactics. And there are plenty of organizers who would be considered radical, like Marissa and I, who we actually all get in a room and we don't agree. But that doesn't mean, but when we get on a stage or we get in public, I'm not going to have that disagreement in public, because that doesn't benefit the movement. So I do think there are some rules of play around how you hold different thoughts that seem like they're conflicting, but they're really not, if we're all moving in the same direction.
I'll be really brief so we can wrap up. I think, Gerald, to your question, a couple of things. One of the things that was unique about, or I think was unique about me at SPU, is I was studying philosophy and scriptures, and yet the whole time I was working with children. So I was a drama teacher, I was planting churches, doing children's ministries, I was tutoring high schoolers, you know, in algebra, and even now in my current life, it's like, you will probably see me on TV. But I also doing things like visiting old people at my church, and working with high schoolers, and working with college students, and going to my brother's play. And so I think being really, it's always been a person who has feet on the ground and their head in the clouds, you know, that you can think really deeply and broadly about things, but always be with the people, and at the end of the day, being with people is really all that matters. And then I think in terms of working with people who are different than you, I have a lot of experience in that, because I'm going to say there's not a whole lot of people quite like me. And And I think one thing that's helped me, and I've had a keen awareness about this for a very, very long time, is I don't expect everybody to play my role because my role is very specific for what God's called me to, and if I'm going to be really honest, I don't want to do it. It's not fun, it's not cute, we'll probably be assassinated at some point, if I'm being like really honest about what I want to do, which Evin laughs at me, but so I think for me, it's understanding that like not everybody's supposed to do my role, and realizing that if there's like this big pack, right, there might be people who are at the back of the pack who are just converting, like just changing their minds, and there may be some people in the middle of the pack who are really sure of how they believe, but they're kind of moving forward. And then I envision myself at sort of like the scary part at the front of the pack, which I don't know, there might be a cliff on the edge, but I'm really just yelling at everybody like, come on, come on, come on. And so I understand that that's my influence in everybody's life, is always calling everybody to just a little bit more and a little bit further. And for me, that's based off of where people are at. So if I'm able to get people in my life thinking differently, or people in the world thinking differently or engaging differently, that's a win. I don't have this benchmarker that everybody needs to be at X. And I think a lot of times that can put a lot of strain on people's relationships. And just recognize that like if you're changing and you're growing closer to Christ, it will strain your relationships with people. But I think for me in particular, like I've had a lot of practice with that. My parents, I come from an interracial family, so my mom's white, my dad's black, and my parents have been in the past Tea Partiers. So, I mean, we're about as...
I read that on Fox News.
Yeah, I mean, we're about as far, and yet we still love each other and have to have conversations, and I feel like a lot of people I know, Christians in particular, are so siloed in terms of their community. They only hang out with people that are like them, that will reaffirm them, and things like that. And one of the things I pride myself on is having a really diverse community group, and so one of the things, when I first started in the BLM, I didn't tell people I was a Christian for like, things were happening really fast, so for like 2 weeks. But a lot happened in that 2 weeks. And then when I did, people were kind of like, okay, cool, whatever.
Was it 2 weeks? I don't feel like it was 2
What
weeks.
do you mean we were shot? Whatever. But,
We met on the 24th of November, 2014.
I don't know, accurate dates are hard. But what's relevant to this is like BLM itself, in terms of national space, and liberal spaces are very anti-religious in a lot of ways, and particularly anti-Christianity. And for a lot of people that I know in the spaces, I'm the only Christian that will myself at all. And the reason that is because I came in first with people people knew my work, and people knew my intention, and people knew that I wrote for them, and people knew that I would take a bullet for them. And so then afterwards, when we were talking about what action should we do, and I was like, well, Jesus at this one time did this, blah, blah, blah. You know, people weren't looking at me like, oh, they were just like, oh, that's her thing, you know, like, cool. And it got to the point that like several months of my organizing, people would be like, oh, you remind me of this Bible story here, you know, so that's become sort of my ethos or shtick. But all that to say is I think if you're continually in the process of humbling yourself, right, and that you're making a Christ-like connection with people from the get, that it breaks down certain barriers, and that people are gonna gravitate to your energy, and people are gonna gravitate to what you're bringing. And so I grew up in Christianity that was very like, give somebody a track and tell them that they're going to hell unless they believe in Jesus, you know. And that's just not where I'm at anymore. I think you have to project and you have to live out something that people want to buy into. And the reality in the United States is that most of what Christians are projecting and putting out there, I don't even want to buy into. So it's really about how you bring people along. And my mom always used to say, she used to say this about evangelism, but I've taken this now into my own work with BLM and just in life. She used to say, when she interacted with people, and my mom's like, really conservative Christian, she used to say, Marissa, you know, it may take interactions with 100 Christians for someone to come to Christ. If you don't know if you're like 29, or if you're 99, if you're 100, or if you're 72. Like, you just don't know. All you can do is put in your effort to be like influencing my life in that moment. And so I've kind of adopted that to be aligned into the work that I do with influencing other people. Is like, God's going to take people where God's going to take people, and God's going to use me however God chooses. I'm learning I don't really have a choice in that. But how do I show up and be faithful in every moment, whether I'm 29 or 84?
So we will close Deaf Poetry Jam Night. We're going to be watching videos, we're going to be having some performances by some poets in Seattle. It's going to be amazing. Make sure you join our Facebook page, and if we don't have your email, please. We're also going to be having one of the founders of the Black Panther Seattle chapter speaking next Wednesday.
Wednesday following.
Wednesday, yeah. Yeah, so if we don't have your email, please see me, Glow, or Sierra before you leave. Let's get through it.